What is the word rate? You've used that word before. What does the word rate mean as you've used it in everyday language? What might it mean? Compares two different quantities. It is it's absolutely a way to. Okay, it compares two different quantities. A ratio compares two different quantities as well, right? In the thing we just looked at where we looked at, oops, that's not the right place. In this thing you just did, you wrote all kinds of ratios for comparing different things. You compared whatever, red to blue, or red to green, or blue to total, or any of those things. That's comparing quantities, but that's the same unit. It's circles compared to circles, right? The units are the same. For what we look at right now, the units are not going to be the same. All right? No, I've totally lost where there it is. I'm okay. Comparing two quantities, and this is with different units. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean here. Let's pause this. I better start this again or people won't know what I'm talking about. So pouring the chips into that box there, let's say we poured 400 of those counters. And it took us, what did you say? 22 seconds. It took, maybe I shouldn't write it like that first. I'm writing it as this is a rate. It's a comparison of two quantities. You could write it like this, 440 counters in 22 seconds. I probably should have written that first. Those two things have different units on them. This is what I mean by different units. One of them is measured in counters. One's measured in seconds, right? I'm comparing those two numbers, 22 counters, or 440 counters in 22 seconds. If I'm comparing those two things and I divide this, these things are different. Whereas when you have a ratio, the things are the same. If you counted the ratio, let's say you counted, why is this happening? If you counted males to females in your class here, what units are those measured in? So you might say, I don't know what it actually is in here. Let's pretend it's 13. 13 people. You're comparing no gender, but 13 people compared with, like, there's 13 males and 17 females, which is probably not right, but you're comparing people to people, right? The units are the same. If I divide 13 divided by 17, and they're both measured in people, the units are the same, right? You're counting people here. Whereas here we're counting counters and seconds. They're totally different units. This is the big difference between how you use the word rate and ratio. They're both comparisons, but one is the units are different, one is the units are the same. You use the word per sometimes. 440 counters in 22 seconds. You could say 440 counters per 22 seconds, even though that sounds a bit goofy. You could actually, what you may have done before is, if you had a fraction that was 440 over 22, can you reduce that to lower, simpler numbers? How are you able to reduce a fraction? Because this is something I think you've done before. What do you do? Somebody put up your hand and tell me. Yes, please do. How do you reduce that to lower and lower terms? Push that again. If I divide these two numbers, 440 divided by 22, you get 20 counters per second. 20 counters per second. You should write that down. You should write down 440 counters divided by 22 seconds gives me 20 counters per second. anytime you use the word per, it usually means some kind of a rate. You don't usually use the word per with ratios because this would sound kind of weird, right? This would be counters per second because you're dividing counters in seconds. This would be people per person, which is you don't usually talk about things like that. You could, but usually you just talk about 13 to 17 without any units. This was a ratio. Okay, just to remind you, ratio, same units. Rates, different units. Let's highlight that in green up here because it's pretty important. Different units. Comparison of quantities with different units. Now let's do the one that they brought up, which was $20,000 for 1,800 students. $20,000. That's okay. If we have those grade 10s. All right. We're done with the interruptions now. We're okay. If you have $20,000 and you have 1,800 students in our school, and this is our target for the Terry Fox run, if we divide that, you guys said that it was $11.11 per student. The units on this rate are dollars per student. Those are the units that you use with this rate. This is called a unit rate. This is called a rate. Okay? Let me tell you why here, because those are two terms that you're going to have to define in your study guide. So you can get the definitions from the textbook or you can try and understand it right now. This is a rate. This is a special kind of rate called a unit rate. What does the word unit mean? When you first learned about counting, you learned about units, tens, hundreds, thousands. What's a unit mean? Kind of like a, yeah, there's a couple ways we use the word units. We talk about units. What are these? A unit, when you're talking about per unit or 1 unit, it's one. It means one, right? In French, how do you say one? That's where it comes from, right? That's what it is. Unit. A unit rate is per one thing. If you wanted to sound a bit weird, you could, instead of saying $11 per student, you could say, well, this isn't weird, but $11.11 for each student. Or you could say $11.11 per one student. Okay? A rate is something that compares quantities. A unit rate compares quantities when the second term is 1. Okay? So we're going to write that. We already wrote a definition, okay, for what a rate is. Comparison of quantities with different units. This is going to be a unit rate is a special rate. Special rate. Where the second term is 1. Let's make that 1 with a really thick pen so it stands out. How about that? How thick of a pen do you want here? 12? Yeah. Where the second term is, this is not going to be very good, but we need a lot of space for this big one here. Special rate where the second term is 1. That's a little gigantic, isn't it? That's a little overkill. How about this? 1. Okay, there. Second term is 1. A unit rate, the second term is 1. You use unit rates all the time, and you might not even realize it in everyday talking. You might say that the speed limit is... What's the speed limit on the freeway out by us here? On the freeway, I think here it's actually 100, but lots of roads are 80. I think this is 100. But what does this say after it here? KMH or KM/H. Yeah, it's probably better if we think about it with the slash because that's for the division. You notice how we had counters per second. You could also write it as counters per second like this. Kilometers per hour. Kilometers per hour. Sometimes people just put kmph. No, they don't do that. That's weird. In the States, they do that. Miles per hour, they put mph. But you really could put miles per hour like that if you wanted to. We're going to use the slash to represent rates here. Let's say we counted, we were really bored, so we sat here staring out the window and we counted how many squirrels went by. Because squirrels do go by, and I want to warn you in advance because it's usually very exciting the first time you see a squirrel walk by on the fence there. See how it's all overgrown with blackberries and stuff? Probably at some time, now you're looking for them. They're probably not going to go now because there's all those prickly blackberry bushes. But at some point they'll cut that all down and there'll be squirrels walking along the fence. So just to warn you not to get excited. But let's say we were really bored and we counted 20 squirrels and we sat here for 4 hours. That would actually be way higher than it really is because it's more like, it would be more like this is 4 days or maybe even weeks. But let's say we did this, it was just all these squirrels everywhere, right? And we counted 20 squirrels went by in 4 hours. You could express it as a rate. To express it as a rate, you could actually express it as 2 different rates. There's 2 different rates you could write. You should write them down. One of the rates makes a lot more sense than the other one. I could say that I have 20 squirrels in 4 hours, right? I could write it like that. Or I could write it as it took 4 hours to see 20 squirrels. Does that make sense to you? Do you see why you could write it 2 different ways? One of them is probably going to make a lot more sense than the other when we figure out what the unit rate is. So again, to label this clearly, I should use some of these other colors here. These are rates, okay? These are just rates. They're not special rates. They're just rates. They're not unit rates. If we want to write these as unit rates, which we will, and what highlighter color should I use here? Blue? Pink? Okay. As soon as you get a choice on things, people care. So if you wouldn't have cared if I didn't ask you, but if you haven't written this down, you should be writing this down, don't forget. Right? You're still writing this down, aren't you? Okay, good. I need more paper, so I need to take my page extender tool and add some paper. You don't have one of those, do you? Okay. You have the back. That's your page extender tool. Let me pause for a second here. What if I want to change this to a unit rate? I need to either know how to divide 20 divided by 4 in my head or go to my calculator if I don't. But that divides to 5, right? But you need to put the units on your rate. What would the units of this be? If I'm dividing squirrels divided by hours, what am I going to get? Squirrels per hour. Squirrels per hour. I know that you've heard of kilometers per hour, but we're counting squirrels per hour. What does that mean? What does this mean? On average, while I was sitting there bored for 4 hours, what happened? On average,
there were 5 squirrels per hour.
Yeah, there were 5 squirrels every hour going by. It doesn't mean that was exactly every hour there were 5. It means overall it averages out to that. What about the other unit rate here? What if I divide it this way? Because I could divide it this way. It took 4 hours to have 20 squirrels. Can somebody divide 4 divided by 20 for me? What does it equal?
5.
No, the other way. We just did 20 divided by 5. When you divide numbers, when you have a fraction, 20 divided by 4, we want to do now 4 divided by 20.
4 divided by 20.
0.2. I know. What are the units on this unit rate? They come from what you're dividing. If you divide hours divided by squirrels, what do you get? Let me review this over here. When we divided squirrels divided by hours, we got squirrels per hour. When we go, we got hours per squirrel here. What now? I know that's weird, but I want you to think about what that means, because this is important. This is the key to being able to work with rates is understanding how those units come. What does that mean? What does this rate mean? Hours per squirrel. We're saying it took 4 hours for 20 squirrels. This is saying it took 0.2 hours per squirrel. What does that mean?
One squirrel will come every 0.2 hours.
Yeah, it takes 0.2 hours for every squirrel to go across. Whereas this one says for every hour, there's 5 squirrels. It's the same thing, it's just upside down, right? Which one of those two do you think is more something that you would actually make sense of in your head? Per squirrel, you think? I sort of think this one does, right? 5 squirrels every hour. Usually you put the time on the bottom, kilometers per hour. What would it be if you turned that one around? Kilometers per hour, hours per kilometer. What would that be a measurement of? Hours per kilometer?
Same.
It's the same thing, but it might be like 0.1 hours per kilometer.
That's 10 minutes per foot.
Hang on, what are you saying? That's how long it takes to go 1 kilometer, right? 0.1 of an hour. You can write ratios 2 ways. You can think about rates 2 ways. You can think about how you're doing it. Okay? Now, with all our interruptions there, that took longer than I had hoped. Some of you, I know, I put that booklet in front of you, and instead of writing notes down, you just worked on the booklet. I admire your inner drive to get that booklet done, but it's going to be important that you write some notes down. Okay? Part of grade 8 is learning to be organized and do what we're doing, right? So what you need to do is, I want you to start working through section 2.2. Even if you're not finished the 2.1 stuff. When we come back after lunch, you got 15 or 20 minutes right now to work. Notice that, am I asking you to do explore the math for this particular section? Does it say explore the math here? You probably don't know what I'm talking about. Remember that for the first one, there was a thing that says, fix. It says explore the math. You don't need to do the explore the math. I didn't put it in here. You need to write down a definition for yourself of rate and unit rate. Let's say that you were listening very intently and you wrote some stuff down that we just talked about. You could use that to help. Let's say you were daydreaming and staring out the window hoping squirrels would come by and you didn't write any of that down. What's your option now? Oh, Mr. Balzarini, can you explain to me the difference between these two? What am I going to say?
No.
I just sat there for 15 minutes explaining the difference between the two. Now it's up to you, right?
It's like 20 minutes.
It was 20 minutes. I realized that. There was lots of interruptions. It would have been faster without them. You could look in your textbook. Use your textbook. But I would like you not just to copy word for word what's in the textbook. I would like you to use your own examples. I made up my own examples like squirrels per hour and all those weird things, right? Counters per second. You can come up with your own. You can compare anything, right? You can compare any two things as long as the units are different, okay? After that, again, there's a couple of examples to do. Use the textbook to help if necessary. Collaborate with the person next to you.